The Yemen Petroleum Company says the Saudi-led coalition has seized yet another fuel ship heading for the country's Hudaydah port. The company says this is the fifth fuel ship that has been detained by the coalition despite having UN clearance to enter Yemeni ports. Riyadh has not commented yet on the seizure of the Yemeni-bound ship. Hudaydah is a key entry point for much-needed aid supplies to Yemen. Saudi Arabia, that waged a war in Yemen in 2015, has also imposed an all-out blockade on Yemen, disrupting the flow of vital goods like food, fuel, and medicine. The blockade has caused a severe fuel crisis, disrupting essential health services. The seizure of the vessel comes just days after Yemeni forces captured a UAE-flagged cargo ship in the Red Sea. The footage later released showed the ship was laden with military equipment and vehicles. Hussein al-Bughaiti is an activist and political commentator who joins us. Hussein al-Bughaiti, we're looking at fuel that's desperately needed by the country and, of course, in turn by the Yemeni people. Even though it has had a UN clearance, why is it that the Saudi-led coalition decides to confiscate this?
The Saudi coalition has been doing this from the beginning of the war. At one point a year ago, there was about 11 or 12 ships were seized by Saudi Arabia. And this is exactly what the Saudi have done, is show you the difference between Yemeni army and between the Saudi coalition. Yemeni army has seized a ship that was carrying weapons that are used to kill Yemeni civilians. They have not seized a civilian ship or a commercial ship. And Saudi, what they do, they actually keep seizing those fuel ships, even though the United Nations has given the green light and has searched those ships. And now, if the United Nations actually want to help Yemeni, they should condemn the Saudi, and they should announce and tell the world who is actually seizing those ships and why, and they should explain that to the international community, because as you know that everything in any country depends on fuel. Hospitals, electricity, water supplies, and everything. If you have no fuel, this means you're gonna shut down everything. But I think that this latest step, it has been done actually by a green light from Biden administration. Just since Biden has sworn as United States president, we have seen the longest shortage and fuel crisis in Yemen since January till today. Saudi has been seizing many ships. The fuel price has tripled. This is because Biden actually, he announced that he will stop supplying Saudi with weapons, which actually he didn't. But on the other hand, he given the Saudi green light to tighten their blockade, to keep seizing those fuel ships. But I believe that Yemeni army should not be calm about that. They should actually let Saudi taste some of what they have created in Yemen. They should actually target Saudi fuel tanker. They should target as well Saudi oil field. They should target Saudi port, and then we're gonna see a huge fuel crisis across the world. And I think this is the only way that Yemeni actually can send the message that no one should actually keep the fuel from Yemeni. The Saudi as well, there are two cargo ships held by the Saudi. They are carrying some goods for Yemeni people, but no one has said anything. The entire international community has condemned when Yemeni army has seized that UAE flagship which was carrying weapons, but no one actually has condemned Saudi even one single time, including the United Nations.
Latest news, Yemen. Headliner: United Nations says $3.9 billion needed for help in Yemen as conflict escalates. Al Jazeera, dated January 12, 2022. The United Nations will need about $3.9 billion this year to help millions of people in war-torn Yemen, a top UN humanitarian official has said. Acting Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator Ramesh Rajasingham told the UN Security Council on Wednesday that the biggest constraint right now is funding to help about 16 million people in Yemen, where a brutal conflict has raged for more than 7 years. The war began in late 2014 when Houthi rebels seized the capital Sana'a, prompting Saudi-led forces to intervene to prop up the government the following year. Over the past month alone, escalating military action in Yemen displaced more than 15,000 people, killed or wounded more than 350 civilians, and left the Arab world's poorest nation facing growing hunger and economic collapse with no political solution in sight. Rajasingham went on to say, I call on all donors to sustain and, if possible, to increase their support this year. He added that funding has been decreasing in recent years, with last year's response plan only funded at 58%, and with the UN World Food Program in December announcing cuts in its assistance budgets for 8 million people. Other vital programs, including water, protection, and reproductive health services, have also been forced to scale back or close in recent weeks for lack of funds. Aside from funding, humanitarian access and security has remained significant impediments to aid. Al Jazeera's James Bays, reporting for the UN headquarters in New York City, said it's a very grim picture for Yemen. The country has been in turmoil for more than a decade. With that backdrop, things have gotten much worse last month. They say there has been deterioration of the humanitarian situation and escalation by all sides of their military action. On Wednesday, the UN also sounded the alarm about continuing hostilities in the country, saying the warring parties have accelerated efforts to claim victory on the battlefield. Hans Grundberg, UN Secretary Envoy to Yemen, told the Security Council that the parties to the conflict are doubling down on military options. 7 years down the road of war, the prevailing belief of all warring sides seems to be that inflicting sufficient harm on the other will force them into submission. However, there is no sustainable long-term solution to be found on the battlefield, he said. The parties, Grunberg said, should return back to the negotiating table, even if they are not ready to put down their arms. Grunberg said it appears that the country is entering an escalatory cycle with predictable, devastating implications for civilians and for the immediate prospects of peace. The UN has estimated the war has killed 377,000 people by the end of 2021, both directly and indirectly through hunger and disease. Headliner, Saudi warplanes target Yemeni hospital amid increased airstrikes. Press TV, dated January 12th, 2022. Fighter jets of the war coalition led by Saudi Arabia have carried out new aerial assaults on residential areas in the Yemeni provinces of Sana'a and Hudaydah, killing at least 5 civilians. Early on Thursday, Yemen's Al Matasiyah TV reported that Saudi-led warplanes had targeted areas in Sana'a, the Sanhan district, and inflicted damage to a hospital there. 4 hospital staffers were injured, 2 of them critically. Similar airstrikes in Hudaydah's Al Ghadar district also claimed the lives of 2 Yemenis, according to a separate Al Matasiyah report. Saudi Arabia launched a devastating military aggression against its southern neighbor in March of 2015 in a collaboration with a number of its allied states and with arms and logistic support from the United States and several Western states. The aim was to return to power the former Riyadh-backed regime and crush the popular Ansarullah movement, which has been running state affairs in the absence of an effective government in Yemen. The war has stopped well shy of all its goals, despite killing tens of thousands of Yemenis and turning entire Yemen into the scene of the world's worst humanitarian crisis. That's the latest news. Now my thoughts. The continued crisis can be exasperated by the intervention of the United States regarding their strong ties to the Saudi kingdom that goes back decades. And that's only because we want to regulate the oil market in the Middle East and keep them as a strategic partner in the war against the Shia minority, specifically Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. And that's because Israel continues to assail Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, who are fighting against the jihadists in Syria and Iraq. Meanwhile, it's the United States and Israel, along with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, who are continuing their assault on these countries because of foreign policy differences within the Shia minority. And this is basically interfering with hegemony in the region, true hegemony in the region, which is, I think, a long lost proposition at this point. The only war that is left in the Middle East is Iran, and it's something that Israel and Saudi Arabia has been pushing for the last 20, 25 years. The United States, because they have such a strong bond with the Saudi kingdom, that the weapons that we give Saudi Arabia goes to fight against the Houthi rebels, which in case goes and kills civilians indirectly, in which we are responsible for, because there's no oversight. And even though Joe Biden tried to push for the end of Yemen conflict by decreasing weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, he went back on his word and continues to approve for weapon sales to the kingdom. Not only that, you still have boots on the ground in Syria, which makes no sense at all, even though we have done one thing. We have caused a military de-escalation in Afghanistan by getting the American troops out, ending the longest war in history. But conflicts still continue, and the Pentagon, along with the foreign lobby institutes, continue to pressure the State Department and the Department of Defense to try and enter the conflict with Iran, or to precipitate the conflict by continuing to exact harsh economic sanctions on the country, which will, in essence, maybe push Iran to engage in conflict. And I think we, the American people, need to start paying attention to what is happening and what is going to happen in the next 24 months. Now, whether I don't think Biden will enter the war with Iran anytime soon. I think he's too old. I don't think he's ready mentally or physically for a long-scale war, and it will be long-scale. What I think will happen is the Republicans will take back the Senate and the House in 2022, in November, because the people will be finally exasperated of the mandates imposed by the Democratic elect. And what will happen is that we will have people who are going to vote for the Republicans, who will definitely push for the wars of the future. And we need to start paying attention, and attention fast.